Helio Gracie is a character that I'm going to talk about in later on down in this BJJ series, all right? Because I think that, and you'll see why, his philosophy and what he demanded his family do, all right, or his side of family, and particularly his sons, obviously, I'm talking about his sons, is something that I think sabotaged the growth of BJJ, all right, in its effectiveness. Now, again, it is effective. Like water is wet, you know water is wet, right? If you're arguing that point, then something's wrong with you. So it's obvious that BJJ is effective. It could be more effective if it was not for the philosophy and the demands of Helio Gracie. And I will talk about that in the series at a later date. Here, I want to talk about something that he felt should be done. And I don't have a problem with it, but there are certain there's a certain trickery that's involved in what he felt should be done. So Helio believed that if a person could defend themselves against a blue belt, okay, could keep themselves from being submitted and could roll, right, effectively with a blue belt, that they should be awarded a blue belt and then start from there, right, learning the guard, etc., etc. Now, he believed that because he believed that Jiu-Jitsu, and rightfully so, he believed that Jiu-Jitsu was first and foremost, or should be first and foremost, a self-defense system, okay? Self-defense art. All right, so I believe he was right in saying that if you can roll effectively with a blue belt, that you should be awarded a blue belt, right? And then you work from there, learning the guard, etc., and solidifying your technique, all right, on to purple belt and on and on, okay? I agree with that. The problem, though, here is that wrestlers, okay, have been given blue belts. Wrestlers, high school and collegiate wrestlers, have been given purple belts, some brown belts, and some black belts, okay? There are several people who have gone right from wrestling to black belts because they were just that good. And if you looked at the video of Marcelo Garcia, you see Marcelo Garcia, who I think is the greatest grappler of any art ever, right? For his creativity, for his aggressiveness. He's not nearly as passive as many BJJ artists are. But he said himself that what he liked about wrestling was you could use it for no gi and you could use it for gi. Excuse me. Now that says something. And because of that reason, good high school wrestlers, and especially good college wrestlers, are given blue belts, purple belts, brown belts, and as I said, some as high as black belts. Now the problem here is that that is not told to the public. You, the public, you don't know that. So what happens is you will hear that T.J. Dillashaw has a blue belt. And Joe Rogan will say he has a blue belt. Or Cody has a blue belt. Or Dominique Cruz has a blue belt or purple belt. You're told that, right? And then because you want to believe it, right? Because you're one of those people who are from affluent, because really, BJJ, some of these academies charge $200 a month. So really, most of the people in America who really are into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu happen to be affluent, the great majority of them white. So this whole premise and how many fights, you know, of course some of you are going to say, oh, I had a couple fights. Doesn't mean if you're affluent or you live in a nice neighborhood, you don't have fights. I'm not saying that. But chances are you don't have as many as someone living in the city, all right? Or even as a white person who lives in the UK in some of the tougher cities, Liverpool, Bristol, all right? So we're talking about BJJ in America is a martial art of the affluent, right? Because it costs to train in BJJ academies, okay? So there's a certain belief that they want to believe. Now, since you want to believe that BJJ is the end-all, be-all, then you are not going to question how certain wrestlers get blue belts, how they get brown belts, how they get black belts, how they get purple belts. And the BJJ community is not going to tell you that they actually award them blue belts, purple belts, brown belts, and black belts, right? Often in gi, but most often claiming that they have a black belt in no gi. They have a purple belt in no-gi. They have a brown belt in no-gi. They have a blue belt in no-gi. And you, the public, you are led to believe that the reason they're so good is because of BJJ, when the fact of the matter is, the reason they are so good as fighters in the cage is because of their wrestling. This is something that goes on, and it goes on regularly. So when you see, again, T.J. Dillashaw, you see blue belt. T.J. Dillashaw was almost immediately awarded his blue belt because of his wrestling skills. When you look at George St. Pierre was almost immediately awarded a purple belt because of his wrestling skills. Now, when it comes down to George St. Pierre, let me say this. There are a lot of you people, right, who try to discredit wrestling, okay? Desperately and fanatically trying to discredit wrestling, right? In spite of people like Marcelo Garcia telling you wrestling, whoa, you got to use wrestling. You got to wrestle. Right? You've got to add wrestling to your game, right? But in spite of that, again, many of you in this denial, right? You say things like, "Oh, George St. Pierre didn't wrestle in high school." Well, no, he didn't. No, he didn't wrestle in high school. But the fact of the matter is if you look at George St. Pierre's game, if you look at his game, it is highly wrestling. If you look at what George St. Pierre is doing, would you say it's BJJ or would you say it's wrestling? It is clearly wrestling. It is clearly 80% wrestling, 20% jiu-jitsu. Even if when he gets a submission, and this is what a lot of people don't want to admit, when these wrestlers get submissions, they get these BJJ submissions because they use wrestling to ground and pound the individual to such a degree that they can no longer defend the BJJ submissions. I'm going to repeat that. So some of you people get it, right? Yes, many wrestlers use BJJ submissions, right? They use them. But the reason most of them lock in these submissions is because they're using wrestling to soften them up to the point where they are so bloodied and they are so tired they cannot defend the BJJ submissions. Okay? All right. Therefore, the wrestling base of George St. Pierre is clearly wrestling. He wrestled with the Canadian Olympic team, and based on his wrestling ability, he was awarded a purple belt fairly early. Of course, he's higher than that now. He may be as much as a black belt. But the fact of the matter is that this is something that the public is not told, that when you are a good wrestler, you will be given a blue belt, a purple belt, a brown belt, and even maybe a black belt. And then you, Joe Public, you, the affluent Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt, right? You want to believe it. Okay? And therefore you say, yes, he's good because he's a BJJ purple belt. No, he's good because he's a wrestler. The purple belt was awarded to him because he could fight, because he could defend, and because he could probably walk in as an NCAA wrestler, walk in and defeat possibly every blue and purple belt in the entire academy in the first place. Some brown belts and many black belts. Okay? So this is what's going on. This is not said to the public, and it should be said to the public, because all it actually shows is an appreciation for wrestling, which is great. I love that, okay? Wrestling is my first martial art. It's not the first martial art I trained in, but it is one that is actually my favorite martial art, and I was said to be a better wrestler than I was a boxer or a karate fighter, and I have to admit, if I say so myself, I was good and still am good at my age in both of those. So I love wrestling, but I want to see wrestling get its just due. And there is just there's too much of an interest in avoiding the facts. And the facts of the matter are that wrestling is king in the cage, and that in order to be a very good or even a decent fighter in the cage, right, you need to wrestle. You have ground and pound. Pound is obviously the strikes. Okay? The ground is wrestling. That's what it is. Wrestling. Riding. Grounding the person down. Breaking the person down from the turtle position. Okay? Not releasing, not creating, not giving a lot of space between your opponent as you move from ground control to, from side control to north-south and then around to full mount. Constantly forcing that individual to carry the bulk of your weight. This is the ground of ground and pound. I just want to see wrestling be given its just due. And it's not given its just due when people are awarded blue belts, purple belts, brown belts, and as high as black belts, and you, the public, are not told that this is actually what's going on. And an individual is good to great because they're wrestlers, not good to great because they're BJJ fighters. Lastly, there are people who have tried to avoid the obvious, and they have said to me, well, you know, a guy learns submissions and a guy does this and a guy does that, and therefore he is a BJJ and he can't fight unless he has BJJ. I want to say this to you. If a man is a boxer and he learns 4 submissions or 5 submissions, right, but he prefers to stand on his feet, you would never say he's a BJJ fighter. Okay? You wouldn't. Excuse me, you would not say that, all right? You would not say that. If a man is clearly a wrestler and he learns 5 or 6 submissions to lock in, he is still a wrestler who knows 5 or 6 BJJ submissions. But to say, oh, now he's a BJJ fighter because he gets some submissions, no. As long as he is softening up a guy with wrestling skills and locking in the submission after he has grounded him to the point where he can no longer defend the submission, then he is without a doubt a wrestler. I have given 36 names of such people, all right? And therefore wrestling is without a doubt king of the cage. Maybe not, obviously not king when it comes down to gis, clothing manipulation, all those things, judo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, study them because you learn how to choke, you learn how to use the clothes to, or use a garment to swing someone around, to throw someone. Of course, in the cage, no gi, wrestling is a must. So says me, so says Marcelo Garcia, and anyone else who is not in denial. But that is my major issue, giving belts to wrestlers because of their ability to defeat, or their defeat of many BJJ artists, and then not telling you, the public, and allowing this myth of BJJ being the ultimate martial art, which there is none, allowing that myth to continue by being dishonest with how many of these wrestlers are getting their belts. All right, so that's the second installment of this particular series. In the third installment, we're going to talk about the origin of some BJJ submissions. Again, most people don't want to talk about it, but me, Save Carmen, the walking encyclopedia of martial arts, I'm going to bring it to you. See you next video.